Welcome, guys, to another episode of Stay Real Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, GD, and I'm so excited to go ahead and start this this podcast episode. I have such amazing guest speakers this time. Today, I will be introducing you to those guest speakers that not only are they relevant to this video, to this show, to this movie that we'll be doing the review on, but also they are huge inspirations to not only me but to the entire community, especially the Chicano community. One of them is my old English teacher who inspired me to do a lot of great things in my life, and he's helped me through a lot. And I'll introduce you as soon as we get him onto this this recording. And then, of course, the next one is actually one who has done such great things to the Chicano community, who's an artist. You can see his murals. You can find him on Google. You can find him on Twitter. I'm going to try to get them to speak up a little bit more about where you can find some of their stuff. But they have so much great things to say. And in this podcast episode, I'm really excited for you guys to learn so much. And because I learned a lot after this movie, and not just the movie itself and the events of the movie, but also just history in general. I got to learn so much about my heritage, my culture, and so I'm excited for you guys to learn a few things about it as well. So, as always, let's get started. Over here, what we have today is I have my former instructor from high school, during my junior year of high school. I want everyone to meet Mr. Rodney Lee. Thank you so much for being on my podcast today, Mr. Lee.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Danny. It's really an honor.
Yes, I'm happy to have you. And as well as today, we also have Mr. Carlos Gallego, who was a civil rights activist who was part of the walkouts, and he is a fantastic muralist. He's a fantastic artist. So I want to thank you for joining us today, Mr. Gallego.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right. So, Mr. Gallego, I don't know if you're able to see the video, the movie I have up right here. So what I want to go ahead and do first is we're going to talk a little bit about the movie before we start getting into it. We're going to watch a little bits and clips of it. And then as we get further into it, with each scene that we start talking about, I would like to hear personally what you experienced while you were there, and try to give you your best remnants of it all.
All right, that'll be fine.
All right. So so today, so we're gonna be talking about the movie Walkout. As all three of us know, takes place back in 1968, where 5 East LA high schools, that started it off doing a walkout. It was Garfield, Roosevelt, Lincoln, Belmont, and Wilson. And it was there was many changes that were needed, but what it came down to. This guy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what it come down to was pretty much our equal rights for education.
Yes, basically, yes.
All right. So so some of the leaders that they make mention in the movie, we have Paula Crisostomo, who's played by Alexa Penavega, and Paula was in Lincoln High School at the time. They stated that she led the largest high school walkout in history, and to this day she's still a current activist speaking about Mexican American equality. we talked before, Mr. Cahill, that you said that you know Paula personally, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Have you been in contact with her recently?
Not recently with all this COVID. No, it's been about approximately less than a year. But yeah, we sometimes come across for certain events, that kind of thing.
Wow, that's really great. Another key person that comes out in this movie as well, who's probably probably the main reason why the whole walkout happened was Sal Castro. He was played by Michael Peña in this movie. He was a Mexican American educator and activist. He was a teacher there at Belmont High School, and then he was transferred over to Lincoln when a Chicano student who was running for student government ended up speaking Spanish at the campaign, and they put the blame on Castro, stating that he was kind of egging it on. And then back in June 5th, 2010, Sal Castro has a middle school named after him by the LA Board of Education, and then you had just informed me a couple days ago that he now has also an elementary school named after him.
Very cool.
That's correct.
Right, and so unfortunately he did pass back in 2013, April 15th to be exact. And then another person that makes a huge debut in this movie as well is Bobby Verdugo, who's played by Efrain Ramirez. Were you close with Bobby?
Very, yes.
Yes. And so one thing that we'll talk about in the movie when we'll see the scene, but I love how in the scene later on in the movie where he talks, where Efrain Ramirez, who plays Bobby, turns around, he goes, "I don't know what I want to be yet, but when I do know, I'm a go for it. That's what I'm gonna be." And years later, he became a social worker who focused with at-risk Latino males.
Right.
He also, when he was an elder, he spoke alongside his wife, Yolanda Rios, at student conferences across the country. And then he just became pretty much a fatherly figure to a lot of the youth that he helped. So it was a sad day when he passed away earlier this year, back in May 1st.
Right.
And so, and then we hit a couple of the other East LA 13 that were arrested. We have Carlos Montes, who's a respected leader of the Chicano immigrant rights and anti-war movements. And it states here that he was a co-founder of the Brown Berets.
Yeah, he was one of them. At that time, there was like ministers of defense. He was minister of defense, but there was different ministers. Barbares, yes.
Yes, and then another one. So he's played by Fidel Gomez in this movie, and then finally another big time leader, also part of the East LA 13 is Moctezuma Esparza.
Right.
Who's played by Bodie Olmos, who I ended up finding out is related to Edward James Olmos.
Right.
And so in this, Moctezuma Esparza became a producer for movies, and he produced not only this movie, but the movie Selena, Gettysburg, Price of Glory, and many more.
Right.
And so he's still an outspoken promoter of of Latino films, and many of his films focus on Chicano themes.
That's correct. Yes.
So, is there? I noticed that Bodie, a lot of these guys had such huge, how can I put this? They had such huge amount of goals and a lot of achievements. That's the word I'm looking for. Achievements in their lives, and it's great that they're, to this day, they're still trying to speak out for ourselves and others.
Yes.
And so, and you, Mr. Callejo, you were part of the East LA walkouts. Can you just, briefly describe what was it like for you during that time frame?
Okay, well, let me just start off by saying I was young, very young at that time. I was still, I believe I was in the 10th grade, 9th grade. So I'm just going to give you my recollections. I basically, I mean, I'm considered kind of I still get recognition as being one of the leaders, but, that's too much credit for me to receive. I basically, but my activism came almost after the '68 blowouts or the walkouts. So I was more of a participant, and I was not very inclined at the time. So for me, it was mostly an excuse to get out of the classes, right? Yeah. So, and with all the troublemakers, but yeah, it was very inspiring, and of course there was a lot. I mean, when people look at the whole event, which was besides being a very historical event, people must realize that more than the demands that were being demanded by the students themselves, there was the backbone was very socially conscious and socially motivated because of the current events happening at the time, the Vietnam War, a lot of police brutality. And even though the issues, the demands were very basically simple justice type of things, at the schools, those were the underlying themes. But the number one factor of the whole thing was basically to put focus and to put attention and to put it in the public eye, the double standard of the educational system in the urban school setting. So that was basically one of the main motivations. Because I don't know the statistics, but if you go back, the monies that were being allocated to inner city schools compared to more affluent schools was very. There was a lot of discrepancy. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
So that was, the main focus was that. Of course, each school had their particular demands. From just simple stuff, the cafeteria food, the no relevant education, dealing with the Mexican American experience, that we could go on. There was various demands. The closing down of the bathrooms during lunchtime. That one mostly happened in Lincoln. We didn't have no problem in Roosevelt, but. I'll give you a brief little chronological order of how it happened. I should say that the whole spark of the walkouts, the unifying of the different schools, sort of came about because prior to the organizing of this event, a lot of the leadership of the students had participated in student retreats that Sal Castro led. That's why Sal Castro plays a significant role and is a key figure. But there was a lot of other people there. There's just tons of people that were involved and were very instrumental in putting these events out there. Let's see. The chronological order. Well, one of the original plans was one of the original intents with the 5 schools, and actually at that time I think there was only 4 schools. It was basically Lincoln, Roosevelt, if I'm correct, Lincoln, Wilson, Roosevelt, and Garfield. Bellman sort of joined in a little bit after.
Wow. Okay.
But basically they had been organizing. They were just young students organizing to do this event, but simultaneously picking a date so that all the schools will walk out in one day, which was scheduled for March the 8th. But one of the high schools sort of jumped the gun, and because of an event that happened at their campus, that one being Wilson, some students were looking forward for this, I guess, like a field trip to a play called Barefoot in the Park, a famous Neil Simon play. And the administration had canceled it, and because of that, some students got mad, and they decided to jump the gun and walk out on March the 3rd rather than March the 8th, which basically just sparked all the rest of the schools to do to walk out themselves at various points and then things. The police brutality and even though there was police intervention to the walkouts, the worst campus that got the most the kids that got beat up, the kids that got arrested, actually happened at Roosevelt, where a little semi-riot broke out outside the school once the police presses were there, and the community themselves seeing the violence that the police brought to the students. This made a backlash with the community. Even though originally everything was high school student driven, after that happened, a lot of the parents and adults joined in and got involved, and so that also took the whole movement to a different level. So in a nutshell, I'm just giving you a little a simple scenario of a synopsis of the events. And there was a lot of things that happened. People got arrested. That's where the 13 come in. I know you, at some of the conversation, you mentioned that the movie doesn't focus, basically just focus on the walkout, but what the repercussions that happen after,
Yes.
like the sit-ins at the school board, all that happened after, and basically that was mostly, those demands was mostly to drop the charges of the people that had got arrested, and to reinstate also Sal Castro, that because he had got fired. So those things happened at the school board, and people basically had a sit-in, and they took over the school board, where we took our backpacks and things and just slept in their chambers, in the school board chambers, as the former protest. Eventually, the police came and broke it up and arrested more people.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Mr. Lee, so with being a teacher yourself and being an educator, you also, you had told me when we first started talking about doing this podcast, you told me that you were also once a civil rights activist as well, correct?
Yes, sir, I was. It was a long time ago. It was in the 1980s, or was actually the late 70s. I was a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We had a lot of focus on South Africa and apartheid at the time, though America was only 40 years out of its own apartheid. And I was just always been interested in civil rights and people fighting for their equality. And when I became a teacher, I wanted to make sure that my students had a voice and they understood their history and where they came from. And working here in Clark County in Las Vegas, my students increasingly became Latino. So I took it upon myself to begin to try to find out about Latino history. Because see, the word education is rooted in Latin, and the root is edusar, which means to draw forth. And you can't draw forth greatness from your students if you don't know how great their people have been. So I owed it to myself to really begin to take a look. And that's why I wanted to show this film to my class, because I wanted students to connect to their history. I wanted students to know that the civil rights movement wasn't just about African Americans, that many people from many different backgrounds were involved, that we were all fighting for a common purpose, though the media a lot of times would like us to think that we were all separate fingers. But we are really, when we ever figure out and become a united force and a united fist, even today, we're fighting the same problems and the same discrimination and the same brutality that Mr. Callejo and those students were fighting back in 1968. A refusal of our government to recognize the humanity of its citizens. And that just really becomes a huge problem. And like I said, it continues today. So I brought in the film because it was just an expedient way for students to look at a text and see themselves on that screen. And like yourself, this many years later, still curious about the things that you saw, and having this opportunity to meet Mr. Callejo and to really learn your history, Daniel, it really makes my job as a teacher. I know that I was a success on that day, because here we are this many years later, and you're still engaged in the question of what happened with my people.
Yes, I mean, that is, Essentially, yes. I mean, so many. I graduated high school back in 2013. We are now in 2020. This movie was shown to me in my junior year, 2011, 2012 timeframe. So we're looking almost 8 or 9 years, ago when this movie came out. And
the movie came out a long time ago.
Yeah, and this movie came out back in 2006, I believe.
Speaking, of course.
And so,
Yes,
so many things have happened. And when I started watching this movie, after I watched this movie, not only did I just go down the rabbit hole of trying to, not only for those who have seen my previous podcast know that I research characters, like the actors that like portray certain characters in certain movies. But this is the first time, this is the first movie where not only did I have to research the actors, but the people they portrayed as well, and how they continue to have these to continue to with their civil rights movements and still being such a big part of the community to this day. I want to give a shout out to my tío Oscar, who introduced me to Mr. Carlos Callejo, because of the fact that my uncle Oscar saw how I was going down this almost like a rabbit hole of not only learning about the walkouts and the sit downs, but also about other parts in history where the Chicanos were a huge part of what we see to what we see today. And so we're going to talk about some of the things, some of the things that I went down the rabbit hole for when we start getting into the movie here. But I did want to just kind of get a little bit of a basis from not only Mr. Callejo, but from you as well, Mr. Lee. To hear some of your background, and for the viewers to hear and see how much you guys continue to try to educate and help the youth and continuing on with the strong presence of being one of my favorite sayings that I remember you saying, Mr. Lee, was there's only one race, and that is the human race.
Yes, sir.
Hey.
Yes, sir. Mr. Callejo, if I could say, Mr. Callejo is one of our founding fathers. See, we always give those titles to George Washington and Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson, and in the sense they did. But during that period of time in the civil rights, Mr. Callejo, Medgar Evers, and so many other people made America live up to the full creed of what it means to be America. So you're an American hero in my eyes, sir, and it's really good to have an honor to meet you today.
A lot of things get unrecognized, but we had some of our very strong leaders throughout the nation. We were at Selma. A lot of them went to Selma. A lot of us walked hand in hand at Washington. Coqui Gonzalez, various leaders in the Chicano movement. I should also say, there was a very strong bond, and the whole thing about the social justice, the justice going on at that time, and there was a lot of unifying factors, which was between the black and brown unity. Around the same time, around the 68, prior to the 68, East LA, Boyle Heights in particular, which is one of the Mexican American communities in the East LA area, actually had a very strong chapter of like the Black Panthers, for instance, and so that sort of sparked the Bronco race. So there was just so much historical stuff that happened around that time.
All right. Yeah, that's so great to hear, and these are the things that I love hearing. That's why I enjoy doing what doing this podcast, because I learned so much, and even after being out of school, I still continue to learn, and and now it's time for my viewers to learn what I've been missing out on for such a long time, because the school boards have not shown me my the Latino history. And so but I am ready to start the movie whenever you guys are.
Go ahead.
All right, so let's go ahead. This is, of course, an HBO film. Once again, as I mentioned earlier, this is produced by Moctezuma Esparza, who was, as we mentioned earlier, is one of the East LA 13th, who got arrested after the walkouts. So, as I mentioned earlier, Alexa Penavega plays Paula Crisostomo in this movie. And so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna go into the first scene, where we hear from Sal Castro.
Bobby, yes.
Okay, so in this scene that unfortunately, due to copyright reasons, we're unable to fully hear. But in short summary, Mr. Castro, played by Michael Peña, is just asking about the Chicano regiments during the Civil War. How Mariano Vallejo, who was a California governor, spoke to Abraham Lincoln right before the Battle of Gettysburg, and as you could. They're unable to find any sort of information on any of the Chicano regiments, any of the Chicanos that were part of the Civil War. And Chicanos actually fought on both sides of the war, both North and South, the Union and the Confederacy. And we're stating here that we're learning history from people that don't know our history. That means we don't, there's no information on the Chicano regiments, there's no information on Chicanos in this particular scene in history class. I'm gonna go ahead and pause it right there. So this scene right here was I found very powerful. They talk about the Chicanos being in the Civil War. Again, this is where I started getting really down the rabbit hole when I really started doing my research. Roughly between 9,000 to 10,000 Mexican Americans or Chicanos were in the Civil War, and we did fight for both sides. And then I did learn a little bit about Mariano Vallejo. After this movie scene, can anyone, Mr. Lee, do you have any information about Mariano Vallejo?
No, I really don't. I'm not familiar with that name, Mariano Vallejo. No, I'm not. I don't know who that is, Manny. Danny.
Mr. Carlos Callejo, can you?
Oh God, there's so much. This is a. Well, I mean, let's see. He's referring to the various wars and the contributions of Mexican Americans, and they go way back. And I myself did not know about their particular participations, but there was a lot of leaders. And I mean, I'm just to say the lack of time, but more recently, I think it's very important, for your listeners to understand that this year. August 29th marks the 50th anniversary of the Chicano moratorium. And I should elaborate a little bit because that's a very historic, just like the walkouts, I think maybe it's probably even more significant in terms of the legacy and keeping the historical significance of the Chicano movement alive. Because the Chicano moratorium, it happened 50 years, well, this August 29th will be 50 years, is where there was the biggest demonstration that happened, and it was, by the way, it was a national Chicano moratorium. That means people from all over the nation were here, from Denver, from Arizona, New Mexico, and so it was a national, and including also various ethnicities being in solidarity. And basically, even at that time, there was a lot of anti-war moratorium, what they call, that was happening against, and the history would tell you, like Kent State, all that. But the reason the Chicano moratorium plays a very significant role is because it is the biggest demonstration that happened at that time in the city of Los Angeles. It was with like 38,000 people gathered for the protests of the Vietnam War in general, but in particular the high death rates of Chicanos dying in Vietnam, because we made 28% of the casualties, where at that time only made about 7% of the population. The big discrepancy. I'm getting a call here. You haven't been cut off, have I?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay, good. So it plays a very significant role, and it was a very, I mean, people normally think that there's protests and that sort of thing. It's normally brought about by young, more militant type of youth, and that wasn't the case. It was a very general public, a little senior citizens with walkers and their wheelchairs, mothers with their strolling. It was very family oriented, and so there was a big march. And eventually, it ended up at Laguna Park, which is now called Ruben Salazar Park. When one of the leaders got killed, that very prominent, known journalist, that more than anybody was basically bringing out the issues in the newspapers about what Chicanismo meant. Anyway, to make a long story short, it plays a very significant role, and it deals with the war. Also, I say that more recently. People don't realize in World War II, and I forgot his name, Farias. One person. We had a lot of Japanese living in East LA, right? But we had Mexicans learning, speaking Japanese. And there's a big movie that actually this Anglo plays the main role, which actually was a Chicano from East LA, that captured a lot of the Japanese in the Philippines, and that's a good book. Anyway, I could go on and on, give you very examples of significant things that are not known and are not recognized in the public eye, that normally get neglected by our politicians or by our educational system and our mass media. So I hope your listeners get to do a little bit more study and a little bit more research on these type of events that happen.
Yes.
Right. Saul was teaching his students about the Civil War. The Mexicans have been involved in America's war since long before then, going all the way back to the Revolutionary War.
Yes.
When General Galvez, with 300 recruits from Mexico, freed blacks, and 500 troops from the Spanish infantry, beat back the British away from the George Washington flanks in Louisiana and Alabama, and actually helped them win the war. And so it has been part of what's been going on all along. People fight for independence for America. They think they have full rights here. And then a few years later, the United States turns against Mexico in the biggest land grab in history and takes half of the country. And not only that, the Treaty of Hidalgo said that, the Treaty of Guadalupe guaranteed the Spanish language would be taught in American schools forever. And New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada all began to legislatively try to break that treaty from the very beginning. So that history, what was going on there, was really deep rooted. And a lot of people don't know that Mexico's second president, Vicente Guerrero, was Afro-Mestizo, and that he ended slavery in Mexico 20 years before it was ended here in the United States. He faced the firing squad because of it. But there's, like you said, Mr. Callejo, there's a lot of history that we just don't know about. People have been fighting for independence and for this country from the very beginning, and all of our voices have not been heard in the true telling of American history.
Yes, and that's great, and that actually segues into my next point. For the longest time, the Chicano studies was banned in most of America, and especially in Arizona. Arizona had banned Mexican American studies. Teachers were unfortunately not allowed to show Chicano documentaries or anything, or any sort of go into Chicano studies at all. Mostly due to the fact that they believe that by teaching it, they're thinking that teachers would try to start an armed revolution. Which I find hilariously just terrible to think.
Yeah.
But but that does bring up the point. It wasn't until just either earlier this year or late last year, where Arizona finally lifted the ban and to continue studying Chicano studies. So. And I believe that everyone nowadays should check it out. I mean, not only just Chicano studies, but so many different ethnicities that have been involved in America and the building of America. that
Absolutely.
we're not able to know about while we're in high school, while we were in middle school, while we were, just in our school systems. And so, so these are things that, it's sad to be able to still say these things when in technicality schools are supposed to help us learn and be prepared and learn our history and prepare for the future. And so
Have a good day.
in this particular scene of the movie, we are talking about showing that these students are unable to go into the bathrooms during lunch hour because they are locked, and you can see that she is forced to go outside to use the restroom outside. So that's what this scene is talking about, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this next part. We saw, I guess Yuri is looking for a restroom, but unfortunately, because of the fact that it's lunch hour, the restrooms are closed, and this is in Lincoln. Mr. Gallo, you said that in Roosevelt, it wasn't closed during lunchtime for you guys.
I don't recall, to tell the truth. I mean, this is one of some of the demands, yeah, but kind of interesting, yeah. Around that time, there was the whole issue about open campus versus closed campus. So there were, there was something like that. Yeah, I'm just thinking. I'm just reminiscing about some of my personal experiences that happened. I don't know if you want me to share that. Yeah, sure.
Of course. I mean, we would love to hear.
I think that it's very important so that you kind of get a true picture of the atmosphere that was going on. After the walkouts in '68, I was transferred out. I would say I got kicked out, right? I was transferred out from Roosevelt, and I was one of the last graduating class of Wilson that because the old Wilson, where the walkouts happened, was actually in another different location where now the current high school is, and they moved, and then that became a middle school after. But back when I was there, it was both high school and a middle school. And coming from Roosevelt, I basically the beginning of my senior year, and I already had been involved because of a program called Upward Bound. I began getting more knowledgeable about the Chicano movement, I guess. And when I got to Wilson, I was in the semester, and it's traditional that the semester. Back then, they used to have a boys' vice principal and a girls' vice principal besides the main principal. But it was traditional that at the beginning of the semester you have an assembly, right? To kind of set a pace for the rest of the semester, to talk about the rules and regulations, the different dress standards that was going to be, have to be adapted, that people get used to for the rest of the semester. And I recall his name. Mr. Royer was the boys' vice principal, and he was the one that was up at the podium. And I had just came out of like I said, in high school. I really didn't want to pay much attention, especially you especially inner city schools. You don't want to create a lot of attention because you don't want to get beat up. You're stuck in inner city schools, right? And you're an outsider. So I was trying to play so low key, not get recognized, not put attention to myself. So I'm just being quiet. But I was in the assembly, and I was in the front of auditorium. And as he's talking, I guess when he's talking about the rules and regulations, I guess he saw the students sort of making faces that there were these rules were a little too harsh, and to other schools and stuff. And then he stopped his speech and he made a comment, and that comment was basically said, "Listen, students, I know you think these are harsh, but these students and these rules makes us better." And then he proceeded to say, "And we are better in comparison to the two other East LA schools." And he didn't mention Lincoln, but he did mention Garfield, and he did mention Roosevelt. And then he kept on going and said, "And with the reason we are better than the other schools is that we were more closer to an Anglo way of life." And so, I mean, to me, once he said that, to me, it sparked attention. I said, oh, wait a minute, that's a racist comment. And so in Roosevelt, we would have probably been already, walking out or doing, some kind of a thing. So I basically was surprised that I didn't see no reaction by the student body. I looked back at the audience, and I didn't see too much reaction. I said, and so to myself, I said, you know what? I must have misunderstood. He couldn't have said that. That's really a really racist comment. And so, but it bothered me. And so, what I proceeded to do is I raised my hand basically, I wanted to ask him, can you repeat your statement? And he kind of, but I guess I was being persistent. And he finally, he knew that everybody was noticing that I had my hand, raised up. And all he did was said, young man, I know for a fact that you recently just came to this school. So you're not part of our family yet. So I'm not going to recognize you as of yet. You're still not a part. So, even then, okay, I misunderstood. He just thinks I'm a big troublemaker. And so after the assembly, it bothered me. So I went up. I told my teacher at the time I was in a gym class that we had gone there. I asked for permission to go up to the podium to where he was speaking, and I wanted to ask him. And I was a student at that time. There was a teacher that I got to meet later on, Mr. Walter, who was a math teacher, big Irish guy, wonderful guy. I guess he was also talking to him about the same thing. And so, of course, me being the student, I had to be respectful, and so I had to wait for the conversation. But, I still had to go back, so I kind of let my presence be known, like get in this side. And once he noticed that I was going to be there, he basically told Mr. Walters, excuse me, right? And all he did was turn around and made a gesture, basically. He turned around and put his hand in the back of his wallet, in his back pocket. And then he turned around and right in front of my face told me, how much would it cost to take a bus to TJ? And I said, right then and there, I said, oh man, that guy really did say it. So, but he didn't know who he was dealing with, because like I said, I had been involved. So that night, I came home and I got on the phone. There was a lot of people that had been involved, like these parents groups that had formed defense committees to bail out kids from the walkouts, and there was different people. And so I basically got on the phone and told them what would happen. So the following day, I walked into the campus and I went to his office, and there was a lot of people around his office, like, with their little notepads and lawyers, and he was in the middle saying that young man misunderstood me. And so I basically said, look, Mr. Walter, I don't want, these people are important. I don't want to take their time away. But when you tell me that I misunderstood, you make me feel like, I'm wasting their time. So I'm not going to pursue anything, but this needs to stop. So anyway, I'm giving you that scenario because that played a very significant role in my life. That changed my life because all of a sudden I knew that there were certain responsibilities to be an activist, and so from that day on, I was never called by my first name at that high school. I was called Mr. Callejo, and I remember, and I wasn't like college material or anything, but it sort of just put me in a different. Anyway, I just thought I would share that little experience.
That was very heartfelt. That was very interesting to hear. I mean, wow! Even after literally just a couple years beforehand, doing these walkouts for your rights and stuff, and to be recognized, and then for him to all of a sudden state something so drastic is very very unfortunate. I guess is the best way I can explain it, Mr.
Sorry, I wouldn't call it these. I don't call these things unfortunate. Actually, for me, those times we're very lucky for our generation because it gave us motivation. I feel more for our this new generation, even though they're going. I mean, Mr. Lee basically mentioned the situations haven't gotten any better.
Nope.
They in some cases gone worse. Economically, also, I feel for the new generation. Then, I mean, we could be poor and stuff, but our heroes were these civil rights leaders and stuff. Now it's just what rock stars and sports.
Right.
So in some ways, it motivated that generation to become more involved and to be more consciously aware of the situations where that sort of doesn't exist as much as at those times.
Right. Mr. Lee, your input on this.
Well, I think that the teacher, the white teacher who denied the girls access to the restroom, made a very important statement about the pervasiveness of racism. It also lets us make the difference between racism and racist. I would not call that man a racist, but he was operating in a system of racism. Just like he said, I didn't make the rules. But when we accept those rules as being normal and stand by and watch people's human dignity eroded, we become a part of that problem. You don't let people go to the restroom and you accept that that's just the way that it is because those are the rules. That's the biggest difference between racism and racist. Like I said, when I call that man a racist, I wouldn't say he was doing that to really harm those girls, but he believed he was just enforcing the rules. It was the status quo. It's just the way society is supposed to be. We can be in the building. You can't be. It's just the way that it is. I don't have to be mean. I don't have to wear a Ku Klux Klan hat. I'm just going along with the system. And I think it's very important that we understand that. That a lot of times it's just so subtle. It's just the way it is expected to be. When we have a mentality that we accept it, when our humanity is taken from us and we're forced to go to the restroom in the bushes or go to a separate restroom or denigrated in any way, it really breeds a germ in us that becomes generational. And that's the part that we really have to be careful of and we have to break. We have to make sure that we maintain our dignity and our humanity even when others do not.
That's perfect. That's great stuff right there. So that's these are some very, very heavy moments here, and so we're gonna go ahead and skip over to the next scene that I wanted to talk about here.
I want to say something because you skipped past a scene there, and I know we're all guys here talking, but I think another important aspect of this film was the empowerment of women. And really for her to have a voice in a Latina family when her father didn't want her to go to school and go to college to pursue, though she was a perfect candidate to be a leader in her community, to go to college, but there was something about the machismo in the family that was telling her no. I think it's of note that during this period of time, women found their voices as well.
That's great. Let's go ahead and we'll take a look at this scene really fast. So this is.
I just want us as men to pass that by because we talk about civil rights, and their rights are equally as important as all of ours.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and take a look at the scene. So this scene here, we're seeing Paula Crisostomo's family here. In the previous scene, on the previous scenes, she's made already. She's obviously one of the main characters in this movie. In the first scene that we started talking about, of course, we had Sal Castro, played by Michael Pena. We had Bobby Verdugo that came out in there, and of course, Paulo Crisostomo. So now we're seeing a little bit of insight in her family right here. So let's go ahead and take a look here. This scene is with Paulo Crisostomo, who is with her family. She's trying to go into this retreat so she can learn more about being a Chicano, to be a leader. And she's trying to convince her dad, who's very old school, very you're the second eldest, and you got to focus on education. Right here, he's saying that she can't go anywhere during the weekend until her younger brother is able to pass his test on Monday. So she's forced to stay home during the weekend to help him study and get a better grade. And that's what this whole scene is about. And we go further into explaining the issues. very, very empowering there. I mean, she wanted to go ahead, and this, it's funny because this kind of reminds me of my mom a little bit. When my mom used to tell me stories about her childhood, my mom was the one that had to sit there, take care of her younger brothers, help them out, and she wasn't able really to go anywhere. It wasn't until after I was born where my mom had more liberty for herself and everything, and so my mom would tell me stories of how when she would grow up, everything was pretty much, she had to do everything. So this is this was a very important scene. Thank you so much, Mr. Lee, for pointing that scene out.
Oppression is oppression, brother. Oppression is oppression.
Exactly.
And no matter what the name of it is, if you're not allowed to be your full self, then I feel as though we kind of maybe oppressed.
Yeah.
And you need to find your voice. So I just want to make sure that, like I said, we took a pause for that, and we took a. That's why I love Corky's poem so much. Yosue Joaquin, because he really took a look at both sides of that history, and it's something that African Americans, you have to really study our history to know some voices to do that. But he looked at both sides about how we were with the conquistadors and we are the oppressed. We played both sides of history. We're equally as guilty as much as we're oppressed, and it's just our responsibility to carry forward and do better. And I love that message, and I think it's a message that we can all hear, that in our history, we've all done horrible things, no matter who we are, what color we are, but it's up to us now in our legacy to do better and push forward together.
May I interject? In terms of the woman's role, yeah, very important to focus on that. And I can give you a lot of scenarios, a lot of the mothers that participated in the walkouts. But just as a point of reference, if for you listeners, if they ever want to see a good movie that was banned in the United States, it was done in 1950. Well, a strike happened in 1952. And I just want to say that the women play a significant role. I won't get into detail. That is a very perfect example. The movie is called Salt of the Earth.
Yes, sir.
With zinc strike in New Mexico. So just as a point of reference.
That's all right. So that'll be that's going to be something for a future podcast. I'll definitely have to take a look at that movie, and hopefully when I do finally get into that movie, you guys would be more than happy to be part of that podcast for if you guys want to be part of it. I do want to continue on with the scene because I love how they really push students to a certain career path that they personally believe students should go to, depending on what I guess in their sense their academics. So.
Hey, how'd it go?
This is that code name. You have a big future ahead of you.
That's good. Yeah.
In the art world.
Industrial arts.
Yeah, nice way to say car mechanic.
He told me secretary. There's no nice way to say that. Well, didn't he offer junior college? Yeah, to improve my typing skills. Anyway, so what did he say to you?
So there we had Bobby Verdugo, played by, of course, as I had mentioned earlier, Bobby Verdugo in this movie is played by none other than Efren Ramirez, who comes out in the movie Crank, Employee of the Month, Kazam, and he's also Caramel Bear in Scrubs. Back then, it seemed like they were very, pushing towards what they believe would be the best career paths. I don't think I don't remember. I don't recall back in my high school. I don't recall them ever kind of saying, "Oh, you got you're perfect for this role or you're perfect for that that role." And I don't know if it was because of the fact that they just didn't believe in the students in this case, where having Bobby just stating, "Oh, just become a car mechanic." I don't know. It seemed kind of, in me, it just seemed like it wasn't enough. It seemed like they didn't want to push forward with that. Your thoughts on that, Mr. Lee?
Yeah, that's a classic. Just having low expectations for quote unquote. I hate the word minorities, but for those people who've been historically marginalized, and the continuation of the cycle of the low expectations, where all you can do is be a mechanic. Malcolm X talked about the same thing in his autobiography. He told his teacher that he wanted to be a lawyer, and his teacher told him that, you're a Negro, Malcolm, and people like you. You should good with your hands. You should be a carpenter. So, it's a constant theme. We see it a lot, and we see, again, how school, sometimes that institution of education steers kids against their full potential. And it should be there to really get kids to realize what they can do instead of questioning in any way at all about their prospects for the future.
Mr. Callejo, were you feel like you were steered a certain way when you were in school?
Most definitely, yes. There was a lot of emphasis in your in mechanic studies, all that kind of stuff, woodwork stuff. Yes, no, definitely. That was a big deal. That was one of the demands also.
This next scene here, this one is a very important scene that I really wanted to touch base on as well. But let's go ahead and take a look at it.
Rush back in the country
This particular scene, this gentleman right up front, he just asked Efren Ramirez's character, who plays Bobby Verdugo, campana, what does gong mean? And Ramirez says, or Verdugo says that it means like a bell, campana. And so because of the fact that he said it in Spanish is why we're seeing him get hit. If you spoke Spanish in class, that's what happened. It was the discipline of being hit with the paddle. And so essentially they're trying to act tough while being hit in front of the entire class with the paddle. Very, very heavy moment. I would like to do a quote really fast from Bobby Verdugo. When he was interviewed back in last year in 2019 on NPR, he states, "As a Chicano, I wanted to be tough, so you don't complain too much, thinking I can take this, but it hurt the spirit. Little by little, they were breaking me." Back then, the words that are on that paddle, or at least on that mount, if it's not worth saying in English, it's not worth saying at all. Mr. Callejo, we were talking before, and you stated that it was mostly disciplinary paddles. You would get paddled for disciplinary actions. But in this case, obviously, what they just show was one of the biggest prominent things was if you spoke Spanish, you were getting disciplined in front of the class.
Right, and it was very degrading. And you have to realize also. I don't know if you noticed the paddle in the scene, but the paddle has holes. There was paddles long. They were made in wood shops. The wood shops, some of the students used to hold it like a trophy in their class. They would put it up. They would even decorate the paddle. And the reason the holes were there is so that there would be no resistance with the air as you being swatted, that there would be no air resistance. So you made holes on those paddles. So and more than just being disciplined, it was just very degrading because you have to be the front of the class and bend down, and then you get swatted. So yeah. Anyway.
I remember there's another movie where they make mention of the paddle, but it wasn't for for disciplinary actions. It was in that movie Dazed and Confused. Takes place in the 70s, where soon to be seniors would go after the soon to be freshmen, and they would get their paddles.
Yeah.
And so thank God that tradition has long been gone. Oh man. Mr. Lee, any input on this scene?
No, just again, I'm glad it's illegal now to hit students. It's just I got swatted when I was in school, and like he already stated, it's just degrading. It's emasculating. Young men have egos, and they're trying to establish themselves in the community and to surrender their power like that to a teacher for speaking their native language. That's the whole thing. The amount of social control to want to take someone's language.
Yeah. I remember when I joined Upward Bound, that we Upward Bound was a college motivational program brought about the Johnson era, the war on poverty.
Yeah.
It was a program that were being developed to get minority students to be interested in higher education, because we were very low in your higher education kind of level. Anyway, make a long story short, what they used to classify, mostly was the blacks from the Watts area, Jordan Downs, the high school, Manual Arts, and then Roosevelt and Garfield in the East LA schools. We would go to UCLA to be in part of these programs. But it was very interesting that the way they used to categorize us, of these inner city students, we used to be what they used to classify us as culturally deprived students.
Yep.
And culturally deprived, give me a break. You have two languages, two cultures, bicultural.
That's right.
And, we should be culturally enriched rather than culturally deprived. So it's just an interesting fact that.
One of the things that I do appreciate about is that not only am I bilingual, I'm actually trilingual. I speak not only English and Spanish, but I also speak a little bit of Arabic. I was once fluent in Arabic, and I learned a lot about their culture in one of the programs that I was in back in high school. It was a summer program. It lasted about a month. And for 4 hours, 4 days, 4 weeks, I learned nothing but how to speak, read, and write in Arabic, and I learned the culture and stuff. And so I think that's what people should do. I feel like people nowadays should be more in touch with other culture, other languages. We are such a huge, diverse country that why shouldn't we?
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and get into the next scene here. So I kind of wanted to get into where they start going to the actual retreat. So that's in this particular scene, I did cut it up a little bit too much, but essentially what Sal Castro is telling the people at this retreat that he wants Latinos to go to colleges. Only 2% of people actually go to college, and that we need to raise that raise that number. People saw Chicanos as cheap and not educated, and he needs to change that. We need to change that, and that's what this scene is stating here. That this is Chicano power. It's power. Right there, very powerful speech from Sal Castro. Very, very powerful reading. I think to this day they still consider that's what a lot of people consider Chicanos, Latinos, whatever they want to call us. They just think that all we have are taco stands, and all we do is sell tamales and tacos and burritos, and they're not showing us the true community. And so I back then, 1968, 2% of Chicanos went to college. One out of every four Chicanos graduated high school. And him wanting to rewrite the history of America, it should be us. And I'm glad, that after this moment, it did change. So, was this the retreat that you were talking about, Carlos?
Yes,
Roughly?
yes, that sort of began. But more than the retreats, there were other little events that were very student motivated, student geared. The Crusade for Justice in Denver, there used to be these student conferences, national student conferences, and so anyway, there was a lot. There was a lot of this.
In this scene that we just saw, some of the people that we saw in this scene, obviously we did see some of the brown berets in the scene. Of course, Bobby Verdugo, as Sal Castro called them, the Cholo King. We also saw a glimpse of Moctezuma Esparza, who's played by Bodhi Olmos in this scene, in this movie. And so a lot of empowerment here. We'll go ahead and here we're seeing Paula Crisostomo and her friends that are walking through. They're trying to get as much information about different colleges, different groups that they could be in. Trying to make sure that we get the Latino community to go to college and stuff. And they run into the Brown Berets, who were huge advocates on kind of like the Black Panthers. And so they're just trying to recruit here. So we have Carlos Montes right here, and then we had David Sanchez, and I couldn't catch this last name over here. But that was really interesting. Carlos Montes. I unfortunately, I know you had given me his information. I unfortunately had not been able to get the chance to give him a call. This is. That's why I wanted to pause this scene, because I wanted to talk about a little bit about Carlos. You said that you knew Carlos Montes, you know him very well as well, Mr. Correct?
Yes. We belong to the organization planning organizing the 50th anniversary of the Chicano moratorium. So he's part of that committee.
That's great. That's great stuff. And of course, here we're also seeing
something.
I quickly go over that little scene explaining who they are, but this is Moctezuma Esparza. He's trying to convince Paulo Crisostomo to go to college, help the Chicanos build a better career in college. The huge influences in our Chicano culture, in our Chicano history. Moctezuma, as I had already mentioned, was the producer of this film, and he's just trying to get people to go to UCLA, trying to go to college, trying to get the Latino community to help educate and become more than what we're seeing and what was going on back in 1968, to help build leaders, to help build who we are. And that's what essentially it is, to understand that we are Chicanos and we should be proud of being Chicanos. And you're seeing all the fun activities that they did during the retreat, and so very beautiful scenes here.
Poem by Jorge Gonzalez.
Okay, hang on before we get into the poem. I just wanted to go into Moctezuma. Some of the research I did about him. He was attending UCLA, but he was attending the School of Theater, Film, and TV, and he received his bachelor in 1971, and then he got his master in 1973. So just a few years after all of this. And as I mentioned earlier, he did a lot of great movies. He produced a lot of great movies, and he has a lot of achievements under his belt. Carlos Montes, as I mentioned earlier, he's a respected leader of the Chicano immigrants' right and anti-war movements. He was a co-founder of the Brown Berets, is what they're stating here. He was part of the East LA 13 as well as Moctezuma. And then there was a time that he went underground. Apparently, he lived in Juarez, Mexico, and then later in El Paso, Texas. And to this day, he still remains an activist. And so, some of the things that they showed in the retreat, trying to get students to continue going to college, try to continue their education, go to college. I think that's still relevant to this very day. We still want students to graduate high school and go to college and pursue a career. But I think the problem is that nowadays with colleges, it's so hard to continue on, because it seems like even after you graduate college, you still end up in a mediocre job for a while, and sometimes those degrees end up having no meaning after a while. As an educator, Mr. Lee, can you please put in your input?
Well, education doesn't necessarily mean going to college. I believe that education is just us continuing to learn and grow and improve ourselves and to try to make ourselves the best we can be. I believe you're right. Economically now, college is almost a hustle. They get you tied up with so much student debt by the time you graduate, and debt is slavery. Never make any mistake about it. Anytime you owe somebody else something and you got to give them your money before you earn it, there's a problem. But, there has to be ways for young people to be able to get an education for free. And particularly my kids that from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, that's what I always wanted to push upon them, that if you want to go to school, you need to make it happen for you for free. And there are ways for that to happen. It's just really difficult. It's a hard situation. Like I said, as a man, I have multiple degrees, and my degrees do give me opportunity. But my son has not gone to school. He's in the military. He has a trade. He does other things. He's continuing to grow and learn about himself. And I can't say I'm disappointed with him, because ultimately in life we have to find our happiness. But we have to think about being able to compete and contend with what's going on in the world. And there's a paper society. And know that diploma, whether it be a college degree or a high school diploma, gives you access to certain things. So it's really a complex situation. I'm an educator, and I do teach kids, and I want them to go to college, but I really want them to make choices that are going to improve their futures. That's a decision you really need to make with your family about what you can do, about where you need to go and what you need to do. There are plenty of people who are entrepreneurs who get out here and put themselves in situations where they do very well for themselves and their families, and they never go to school. So it depends on the individual. It's not my place to tell kids what they should do with their future. That's what I feel as an educator, and a lot of times I think we give the state too much power over saying what we're supposed to do.
Carlos, do you have anything to say to that?
No, you said it all. That's perfect.
So this next scene, this is a beautiful poem. I got the chance to read it personally. I was debating if I wanted to read it myself and on the podcast, but I think Michael, Mr. Pena here does a very good job stating it. So we're gonna go ahead and let him speak here.
I am Joaquin, lost in a world of confusion, caught in the whirl of gringo society, confused by the rules, scorned by the attitudes. I've come a long way to nowhere. I am Cuauhtémoc, king of an empire, civilized, far beyond the dreams of the Gauchupin Cortés. I am Mayan prince, great leader, the Chichimecas. I rode with Pancho Villa, Hidalgo, Zapata, Murrieta, Espinosa are but a few who dared to face the force of the tyranny of men who rule by farce and hypocrisy. I stand here looking back, and now I see the present. In a country that's wiped out all my history, stifled my pride. I shed a tear of anguish when I see my children disappear in the shroud of mediocrity. Never to look back and remember me. And now the trumpets sound. The music and the people stirs a revolution. Like a sleeping giant slowly rearing his head. And we start to move. La raza, Mexicanos, Españoles, Chicanos, Latinos, whatever I call myself, I look the same, I feel the same, I cry and sing the same. I am Joaquin. My blood is pure. I am Aztec Prince. I am Christian Christ. I shall endure.
Wow, very, very powerful poem. Mr. Lee, I know you had sent me a almost like like an alternate version of this poem. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a response to Yo Soy Joaquin, because it is such a powerful poem, and like I said, I love the way that it goes through the layers, through history, and it really accounts for both sides and multiple layers of history. So, yeah, I tried, I'm a poet myself, and I tried my hand at it, so, yeah. My dogs are going crazy, so do for you.
Mr. Callejo, you have any response to this poem?
No, that's fine, perfect. It's just it's a historical poem.
Very, very beautiful. I found it very enticing. It's because of this poem I ended up learning a little bit more about Joaquin Murrieta. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to skip over quite a bit here. I want to get into this little scene right here just really quick, where they go to this school. They stop by a school. Okay, in this scene, Paulo Cristosomo, Sal Castro, and a few other people from the retreat stop by this high school so that way they can rest up and stuff. And you can see Paulo Cristosomo going into a library, and she's amazed by the amount of books that she sees and the amount of rows and columns. If you pay close attention here, so Mr. Castro comes up to her and pretty much ask her, like, you know, hey, like, everything good? And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I just got so interested in the books. You know, she's someone that wants to learn. She's someone that wants to know more. And she's going through how many books there are here at this school, and the school that she goes to in Lincoln High School have barely anything of a library. She's talking about the different languages, French, German, Greek, and then they even have Spanish, a Spanish section where you can learn and read Spanish. And she goes, you can't even speak Spanish in our schools. And from there, she ends up getting the idea from Sal Castro. Sal Castro goes, you should write a story about it, write something about it, an article. And she's like, what, The Tale of Two Schools? And he's like, that's not a bad title. And so she created that. You can look it up. It's a beautiful, beautiful reading. So I just wanted to touch a little bit of bases on that scene. I wanted to get into that just a little bit. The libraries are such a key thing in schools that I believe that it was kind of sad for me when I heard when you know that heard that scene. It's like, look at all these books. Our library is so sad, and it just kind of made me think, like, man, like, how bad could it have been, like, to the point where you have to say it's sad. And they have school, you know, they have these books in Spanish, and then she turns around, she goes, we can't even speak Spanish in our schools. And it just shows that, you know, I think this movement really, I think it did end up making a huge change to in some way or another, because I believe in my school, when I was in high school, we did have quite variations of books where I was able to learn. I'm going to skip ahead. We're going to skip ahead quite a bit in this movie here. We're going to get into what would be considered the first meeting. Okay, here we have Moctezuma asking everybody if they read Paula's article on The Tale of Two Schools. Everyone's saying that they loved it, but there's a whole idea of everyone knows what's going on in the schools and no one cares, no one cares to try to fight it. And Moctezuma's like, well, they should care because a student's writing it, a student's voice is coming out, and they will get them to listen. And they're like, well, how do we get someone to do to listen that doesn't want to listen? And by getting more voices than just one person, and so they come up with the idea of doing like an essay at first, but then they're like, you know what, let's do a survey, try to get as much information as possible. And the Brown Berets are like, nah, let's make a stand, let's be more active about it. And so, but the idea is to try to get the kids into it. Here they do the surveys, Mr. Lee. So I think this might have to be a two-parter a video, because I mean we're about an hour and a half ish into this video, and there's still a lot of this movie to go on through, but I just wanted to quickly say, so we get into this like little first kind of group meeting, and they start talking about surveys. Do you remember the surveys, Carlos?
No, not really. Like I said, I was up in the 10th grade. There was a lot of stuff going on. At that time we were also putting out a student-based like newsletters, very creative, and so we would be raising a lot of issues. But surveys, I don't recall surveys. No.
Mr. Lee, just a quick little input. Do Do you think that if students nowadays were to do surveys about how the school system is nowadays, do you think that it might better the school system a little bit more?
Well, the district does offer a survey they put out to all students, parents, educators, and community members every year. So, has the school improved?
Yeah.
So, I guess they don't really take us seriously, when it's just students, and so.
Yeah.
But I feel like not enough people are probably answering the surveys either.
I hate to be a pessimist. I've worked in education for 25 years now. The system is not broken, and I think everyone forgets that. This education system is doing exactly what it is designed to do.
There you go.
The idea is for kids to replace their parents in the social order.
Yeah.
So if your parents worked for capitalism and was a cog in a machine, if they were migrant farmers, they intend to raise you to be migrant farmers to replace them. The problem is that those jobs that our parents used to have don't exist anymore, and they don't know what to do with us.
Right.
Yeah.
Vegas is kind of lucky because there's a lot of brass poles they need young ladies to swing around. There's a lot of rooms they need maids to clean. There's a lot of things like that. And if you look at our education system, we're last in the nation, and is that way on purpose. It's not a mistake. And everyone says, we got to fix it, we got to fix it, we got to fix it. Well, it's working exactly the way they designed it.
It's very powerful. Well, like I said, so we're going to go ahead and put a pause on this particular video here. I want to thank you guys so much for taking a moment of your time today, to do this podcast and get to learn a little bit more of the history and a little bit of more facts of what happened. Would you guys be okay about coming back when we get into the second part? And finishing these up, or did you guys enjoy this experience of being able to talk about your inputs? How do you guys feel about that?
Well, for me, my pleasure. I'll welcome back, especially in that scene. And this scene, I think a little bit after, you're gonna get to one of the characters that basically was placed there as an infiltrator. By the LA police department. That wasn't there. And so I wanted to kind of dwell a little bit because I just, just for the sake of the new generation that, back then all these not radical, I would say more progressive organizations were being infiltrated. But in those days, they were infiltrated by more policing type of agencies. Alcohol, tobacco, firearms, the local sheriffs, the local LAPD, CIA, FBI, all those are policing type of agencies. But currently nowadays, you have much more than that. You have also the private corporations. In order to, every time that there's a campaign, a progressive campaign, somehow when it's about to take a leap from a qualitative to a quantitative. In other words, it's going to make further changes where it's more of a mass mobilization type. Something comes in to stop that progress. And rather than the people being proactive and being on the offense, all of a sudden you have to defend yourself because a lot of lawsuits go into place. So I wanted to mention that these privatizations, for instance, and I'm giving you a personal experience that happened, for instance, in one of committees where AMFOGARD, is an anti-terrorist group, got involved in some of our efforts. AMFOGARD is very tied up to ALEC. ALEC is trying to privatize all correction institutions. In California, for instance, the biggest industry after agriculture is actually corrections. So, I wanted to kind of elaborate, but that would be in a different scene, but yes. Elaborate.
Mr. Lee, what did you think about this experience?
I really enjoyed the experience. I don't have a problem at all coming back, and I look forward to it.
All right, guys. I appreciate you guys so much, and hopefully, maybe I'm gonna try to get in touch with Mr. Montes as well. Let's get a little bit more information. And if you're able to, Mr. Callejo, it'd be an honor if you would, if you're able to get a hold of any other members of the walkouts, and see if they wouldn't mind doing something, to continue on with this process. I would love, I think not only myself, but I think Mr. Lee and my viewers would love to see, where are they now type of deal.
Perfect. I will.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. And one thing I do like to sign off with is I appreciate all you guys joining this podcast today. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And I will go ahead and, we're going to try to get more information here. We're going to, we're happy to inspire and educate everyone that's, that is watching this video. And as always, make sure everyone stay real.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. It was very nice meeting you, sir.
It's very nice meeting you, Mr. Lu.